Trump said at the NATO summit that the ceasefire is over. He called Iran scum. He told also reporters that the US will hit them very hard tonight with a little warning. Then there was a second press conference. He was participating with Pete Hegseth. His language was a little bit softer than before. He said then that the US might attack Iran very hard tonight, a sentence we heard from him before. So after a while, this very harsh language loses its meaning. Generally speaking, Riyadh has reportedly told its Gulf allies to avoid any steps that could trigger a response from Tehran. The kingdom's core interest is that it does not want to become a retaliation target. I'd say Riyadh is running a dual track. They are hardening at home and trying to do de-escalation abroad. Its military raised readiness levels earlier in the war. Aramco has poured resources into shielding its facilities from missiles, drones, and also cyber attacks. And furthermore, the Gulf states signaling that they really want to have peace in the region, and they do not let their airspaces or bases used to attack Iran. They are protecting their sovereignty without escalating it.
The ceasefire, as we know, appears increasingly fragile, while Bahrain and Kuwait have already come under Iranian attack. How concerned is Riyadh that the conflict could spread further across the Gulf?
So generally speaking, I refer here to the Council of Foreign Relations. They noted that the capital, which fled from Dubai and Doha, partly moved to Riyadh. So the kingdom is seen as a steadier haven. Here on the ground, there were no sirens, no missile alerts, no interceptions reported in the last 48 hours. The alarms sounded next door, which means in Bahrain or Kuwait. And here there's nothing. The daily life continues largely as normal. And for me, always a clear sign is the airspace. Saudi airspace is not just open, it's one of the busiest safe corridors in the whole region right now, as Iran shut down its airspace and Kuwait banned overflights. International traffic is trying to avoid this conflict zone and is currently rerouting their airplanes through the Saudi Arabian airspace. We can see that with the Jeddah flight information in the region. They're absorbing heavy overflight demand, and Saudi routes are running as peak bypass capacities, I'd say.
Oil security in and around the Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure. How is Saudi Arabia balancing its security concerns with efforts to avoid being drawn directly into a wider US-Iran confrontation?
So I'd say it's through economic self-defense rather than military alliance. After the tanker was struck earlier in the Strait of Hormuz, Riyadh keeps its public distance to the US line, but hedges in practice. We can see diverting oil from the east-western pipeline to the Red Sea port of Yabu, it's called. And the bypass capacities, if you take Saudi Arabia and also Iraq together, it's roughly 9 million barrels per day. Of course, it's a smaller amount than the 20 million through the Strait of Hormuz. But that signals that, of course, those alternatives cannot replace the strait. But it's an option for Saudi Arabia currently, which they are using and also exploring. And so, and that also shows that why de-escalation is economically the most rational course right now. That's what they are doing.
If diplomacy collapses and hostilities intensify, can Saudi Arabia realistically remain on the sidelines, or is it preparing for a broader regional conflict?
So it wants to stay out and is actively working on that. Generally speaking, Saudi Arabia is a very strong country. Its foreign reserves hit a 6-year high earlier this year, and they have enough resources to cover roughly 22 months of imports, according to Arab News. And despite the renewed strikes, attempts to form peace are still ongoing. The June Memorandum of Understanding between Washington and Tehran remains the framework, and the Gulf capitals are working to keep the channels open, even as the fighting flares. The efforts to run the straits through the we can see those efforts run through the NATO summit, which is currently taking place in Turkey. Riyadh influence there is, I'd say, more indirect through its GCC partners. Saudi Arabia itself is not a member of the NATO Gulf Partnership Framework, but of course they all work together. Its voice on the table comes through its neighboring states. Yesterday, there was a dedicated meeting between the ICI foreign ministers. It was held at a summit chaired by the Turkish foreign minister, and they want to bring the Gulf countries closer to the NATO. The focus was addressing shared security concerns, specifically maritime security, the safety of energy exports, and whether existing security frameworks are still adequate given the Hormuz crisis and the current Iranian military activities. And the tone in this room was very interesting because it captures the Gulf dual track approach. Kuwait's foreign minister condemned the Iranian strikes on its country is a violation of its sovereignty, but also Kuwait raised hope that US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding would ultimately serve regional stability. So I'd say the Gulf countries still focus on the negotiations and bringing everybody back to the table, and they remain calm.
Finally, Alina, Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in Vision 2030 to project stability and attract global investment. How much could a prolonged US-Iran conflict undermine those economic ambitions?
So I'd say a long war threatens the diversification sectors. That means tourism, tech, finance, that the Vision 2030 depends on, but resilience is definitely documented. I was looking into the details today, and the IMF recognized a strong financial buffer for Riyadh and for whole Saudi Arabia. They are heavily investing also in foreign countries. Even the insurance shock from the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which meant 12 times repricing withdrawal from the private sector, was not a big issue for Saudi Arabia. That was the World Economic Forum who stated that. So the conflict costs growth and also a lot of nerves, but Saudi Arabia is positioning itself as a stable exception in an unstable region.